Well, hello there, and thank you for joining me for this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cook. This week I'll sit down with Vicki Hogarth, who is my counterpart at CHCO-TV in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, and we're going to talk about some common threads in recent news stories between our two provinces. You're also going to hear about several things happening in eastern Richmond County this week. In a couple of minutes' time, I'll speak to Gordon Kerr, who is the coordinator for the annual Swim the Canal summer event in St. Peter's. But we begin with the issue of mail delivery in the communities of Lower Lordways, Grand River, Saint Esprit, and other parts of northeastern Nova Scotia. In just a few moments' time, I'll speak to the Deputy Warden of Richmond County, whose District 5 takes in all these communities, Brent Sampson. But we're going to start off with a studio interview with a resident of Grand River Falls, Judy Morrison. She's a past chair of the Richmond District School Board and a former representative of the Strait Regional School Board, and she also has served for many years on the Strait Richmond Palliative Care Society. You may have seen her recently on our palliative care edition of Roundtable. But we are going to speak to her this time around about inconsistencies in mail delivery in Grand River Falls and the surrounding communities. So let's take you to our Telile studios in Arishat to speak with Judy Morrison right now. This has gone on now for, by the look of things, a couple of months, and it seems to stem from the retirement of a driver for Canada Post that was operating out of the Lower Lordways office. Can you tell us a bit about why we've come to where we are today? What happened?
Actually, it started in first part of March.
Was that far back?
It was that far back. The original driver, who had it for about 22 years, had some health issues and he was off, and we had another gentleman from the community who was doing a wonderful job. And then when the time came that the original man retired, and the man that was filling in applied, he was rejected. Okay. He had been doing it for a year, filling in for years, and really a year and a half. And then they took someone from Kentville, and apparently, I don't know if it was he or somebody, moved to Port Hawkesbury, and they started the mail delivery, and I'm not sure if he lasted the month, maybe a month and a half. Mm-hmm. And then there was another guy filled in, and he was only there a few weeks. And then there was somebody else came, and they do it for a week. And then finally, I think it was in end of June, 1st of July, that we had nobody. And Canada Post didn't contact anybody about it. I think that's one of our biggest gripes. There was no communication whatsoever to the people. Finally, one of the people in the community went to the main post office in Lordways, and that's where our mail came out of. And we realized that we had to pick our mail up in Lordways. And she actually, after tried to convince them to put a sign up, because nobody knew. And then I found out online, because it was online, somebody put it there. And it's not convenient to do. We are a community, basically, of seniors. We have a few young people. And they do everything online, but us older folks don't. We still get mail, bills, or we get Christmas cards, birthday cards, whatever. We need the mail, and we need it delivered.
Yeah. And I imagine there are a lot of people in the communities, not just seniors as well, that don't have the ability to drive to the post office in Lordways to pick up their mail.
Oh, that's very true, yes. And some of the folks will go maybe once a week, or maybe not even every second week, to St. Peter's for groceries or whatever, and then that's when they would get their mail. And I know that everybody says it's the age of technology, but we all don't do things online.
No.
I like to have my bill in my hand it's just, I'm old-fashioned, I guess, but I like to have it. And if a senior or anybody is expecting a check in the mail, that becomes a stress for them, not knowing if it's going to get there or not.
Let's talk a little bit about the not knowing, Judy, and I'm wondering, when did you and your neighbors realize that mail just wasn't getting through? Was it 2 or 3 days? Was it a week? When did you folks start to take action on that?
It was probably, for myself, it was probably a week, because I don't, we don't get a lot of mail, but we do get mail. And I couldn't understand why. And then everybody, of course, started calling Canada Post. A couple of people were fortunate to have calls returned. I myself called a couple of times, and I wasn't notified again. I did go to the post office, and one of the ladies working there said that we would be having delivery again. No, I'm sorry, that there was a lady from, I think she was from Lewisdale.
Okay.
She was doing the run in River Bourgeois. And she agreed to take over the Lower Lord Wastes run and our run. So she did that for 2 weeks. And she finished on Friday. And we were very thankful to have her. And somebody knew it was supposed to start today, but it was a big secret who it was or what time they'd be here or anything.
But there's been no mail delivery that you know of, at least this morning. We're recording this on the afternoon of Monday, July 24th, and there's been no mail delivery so far.
Well, there's no mail delivery today because all of Canada Post canceled their post deliveries because of the storm. So we're hoping tomorrow that we will see a new face and hoping that they will keep it. From what I understood from the little bit of information I did get from the lady at the post office, was there was 5 that you have to write a test of some sort, and you have to score certain points. And now this is on a contract basis. It's not an employee. And there are 5 people. So I said, so, this person decides, I don't like driving over these rough roads. What happens? Well, they'll go to the next person. And if each person says no, no, by the time they get to the last person, then they're going to start a process of interviews again. And, I know our roads aren't perfect, but they're not that bad.
No.
But people that are not used to driving on dirt road, ours is, they probably have to drive 7 kilometers or 8 kilometers with mail on our road. And then, that's the only dirt road they would have. Then they would have to go down to St. Esprit, which is under construction at the moment.
Okay. And it's helpful for the benefit of our viewers as well, too, to note that within the past 10 years, there has been improvement along the roads leading into and connecting Lower Lord Waste to Grand River. There has been paving, but there's still, as you mentioned, several roads and several houses that are along dirt roads heading out to St. Esprit. Yes. You're right that there's still a lot of places where a driver would have to be used to driving on dirt road.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take your time, and I guess once you're used to living on it, it's a different situation. But I mean, it's not terrible. They do grade the roads, and they look after them as best they can under these times of constraints. So it's, it's hard to know, and I understand if a person has a new car, they don't really want to be too rough on it.
No.
But, and I mean, I don't know a lot about this contract situation, except that I do know that they don't get any benefits either, because they're not an employee off.
Yeah. So some sympathy for the person who does have to drive the mail out.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But I still will fight tooth and nail, because we've had mail delivery. Well, I'm in Grand River for 54 years, and it was there long before I got there. We've lost so much in the community already. We've lost our school, we lost 2 stores, we lost our post office, and we lost a church. So we're getting down to very little. And we pay our taxes, and we deserve to have what everybody else in Canada has, postal delivery, 5 days a week. We deserve that.
Now, speaking of paying taxes, you've been working with the municipal councillor for your area, Brent Sampson, for District 5 on this. Can you give me a sense on what kind of assistance he has been to you in this regard and to the residents there?
Well, I actually had a meeting with Brent, and he has been in contact with MP Callaway, and he's certainly doing his best. And of course, he's involved with Lower Lordways, which is certainly the area where he lives. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he has spoken up for everybody because he is the councillor. And, he's been of great assistance to us.
And we'll be speaking to Brent Sampson as part of our investigation into this story as well, too, for Telile 24/7. So We'll look forward to having him on the broadcast. Good. We have covered a lot of ground in just a few minutes, Judy, as I thought we might on this story. Do you have anything else you'd like to add about all this just before we wrap up?
No, I did an interview with CBC, and there were some comments made, and they were, of course, from people that have no idea as to where we live or our situation, that were very negative. And it's, they were saying about technology. We all don't do technology, and I think it's time that people just realize there are people in communities that still want their way of the old way. I don't want to send a birthday card online. I want to write it, and I want it picked up in my mailbox. And if somebody's sending me a sympathy card or a birthday card, I want to see it in my box, and I want to see it online. I think that texting and messaging, emailing, I think it's just gone too far, really, because it loses the personal touch. And that's what I feel Canada Post is doing to us, is making us lose our personal touch to communities.
And you will find a lot of people around our viewing audience for Telile here in Richmond County and beyond that share that same feeling as well, too. So we appreciate you sharing with us. Judy Morrison, I know this is certainly not a happy story, but we appreciate you taking some time and coming to our studios here in Ayrshire to share your thoughts on this. Thank you so much for joining me on Telile 24/7 today.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
And now joining us on Telile 24/7 is the municipal councillor for Richmond's District 5, which takes in Lower Lordways and Grand River and the surrounding communities. Brent Sampson joins us. Thank you, Brent, for being a part of this discussion on Telile 24/7.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Adam.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing what you have to say on this. And the first thing I want to catch up with you on, we're recording this interview on the evening of Wednesday, July 26th. And we know that Canada Post Service was shut down on Monday, the 24th, because of the flooding that had taken place in different parts of Nova Scotia over the weekend. But it seems like service has started up again. What can you tell me about what's going on with the new driver that's taking on the Grand River and Lower Lordways areas? What have you heard?
So I was in contact with the post office in Lower Lordways today, and the new driver has been at it for a couple of days. They're getting accustomed to the new route, and hopefully this is a long-term solution. We had somebody, the last couple of weeks filling in, so the mail service has been better, I guess, in the last couple of weeks than I would say it had been in the last few months, or month and a half anyway.
That was the understanding I got speaking to Judy Morrison of Grand River Falls about this issue, that this has been going on for quite a while with the retirement of a longtime driver and then difficulty in being able to find replacement drivers, even on a temporary basis. What had you been hearing at that point from your constituents? Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, you're the councillor for those areas. What had they been telling you about the difficulties they'd been having with mail?
So for the last several months, been hearing little bits and pieces that, they had some difficulties. They had one or two drivers that, had been here for a certain amount of time and then moved on to other positions, had left the position, and it seemed that they were having a hard time to fill this on a full-time basis. And then around early to mid-June, we ran through a stretch for about a month or so where more often than not there wasn't any mail, and even the community mailboxes you would see, like the one near myself, it had a sign on the outgoing mail slot that was taped over, just saying not to use it. So there was a few weeks there where there was very, very sporadic mail. You may get a day or two a week if you were lucky.
I think it's important to paint a picture of the demographics of the communities being served here. Speaking to Judy Morrison, she pointed out that while many services such as billing are now available electronically, that is something that a lot of seniors in the area and a lot of folks who are computer illiterate as well have difficulties with doing. And she brought up the point that some just don't want to do it, that it's a personal choice of theirs to have a bill in their hand or have a letter in their hand. Can you comment on that at all, the high senior population and also just the difficulties for those who don't wish to receive their bills or their mail by computer?
Yeah, I think the mail service is still quite busy, especially in rural areas. I know even myself, I pay the majority of the bills online. However, I usually receive paper copies. I prefer to do it that way. I'm thinking even the Straight Area Report or newspaper that's released once a week. And I saw a situation during this stoppage with service where instead of receiving it on Wednesday, I received one the following Tuesday, and then the new one the next day on the Wednesday, because it just happened. We had a couple of days in a row of mail. But there's a lot of people they may be getting bills very late, and especially if they don't have a PO box, which we don't with this smaller post office. And if you were working during the day, then you just may not have time to get there during business hours. So your mail would stay there otherwise, because there was a period of time where they were just recommending to people, oh, come to the post office to pick it up. But it's one thing for people who are working during the day. It's another thing even for some people don't have access to vehicles that easily. And, you take up Grand River Falls and so on, you're 20, 25 minutes away from that post office. So, it's a significant distance, right? That creates an issue for people.
And one other aspect of the idea of getting these communications electronically, and this is something that's been near and dear to your heart in terms of an issue as a municipal councillor, you're not far from communities such as Framboise, Forshoe, Loch Lomond that are having difficulty even receiving basic internet service and reliable cell service. So I'm just wondering, was that a factor in Grand River and communities heading out towards, say, Saint Esprit? Was that an issue there, that they were having trouble even just being able to get basic internet service to be able to pay bills electronically if they wanted to?
The cell service, for one, is really poor in the Grand River area, and it has been, as with a lot of areas, it seems to be getting a little bit worse all the time. We're seeing that, it seems, across the province. But internet service, I think we're hopefully close on getting the fiber op hooked up. However, we've been hearing that for quite a long time. We are seeing some areas. I know Johnstown recently received the hookups within the last month or so, and I was speaking to a few residents up there that were quite pleased with it. I'm hoping we're looking at a timeline sooner than later, but it seems we've been saying that for quite a stretch of time now. I mean, that not being in place, that does create a factor as well, but I think part of the issue as well was people didn't really receive much of any communications from Canada Post on what was going on. You would have to reach out to them yourself and try and ask questions, which I'm sure was stressful on the local people working at the post office too, because, people weren't sure what was going on. They were probably upset by this, stressed out. The days that we did get mail, it may have been nice if they could have sent out a communication saying, here's what's going on. We're having some service disruptions in your area, just to reassure people as to what the plan was, because I think a lot of people felt like they were in the dark on this. You might get mail tomorrow, and then maybe you wouldn't get it for 4 or 5 days, and you weren't sure why.
Are you hoping that Canada Post learned something from all of this? I mean, it's one thing to say that they were trying to find a driver and even trying to find a replacement driver when they weren't able to bring somebody in full time. But are you hoping that in terms of, as you say, basic communication to the residents, consistent mail service to these areas in rural communities, are you hoping that Canada Post may have learned something from all this and will be trying to provide more reliable service going forward?
I hope so. And I mean, I understand that probably part of it is the labor shortage we're seeing in all kinds of sectors, right? These jobs are getting harder to fill. The person filling the job right now, from what I understand, is from Sydney. So they're having to reach further afield to fill these positions. And I think that was part of what bothered people in the first place, to be honest, was there was local people a couple of times that applied and then were passed over for the jobs. And for whatever reason, um, I don't know how much of a factor that was, but it's often a factor on whether or not somebody stays, because if they have to travel a long distance to do this job, they may not be here long term once they find something else closer to home, because there is a lot of options out there right now.
And I think it's important to point out too, it's not a 5-minute drive that these people are doing in terms of getting the mail out, because this same person would have to cover lower Lordways as well, out to Point Michaud, in addition to Grand River and out to Saint Esprit. So, I mean, obviously, that's several hours of a day. That's a very labor intensive job. So, it's one thing to say that they'd have trouble finding a driver, but finding a driver for that kind of a commitment is not an easy thing.
No, you're exactly right. The other thing they mentioned too, and I don't know if there's been any progress on this, but was trying to find a couple of relief drivers, like temporary or casual drivers, because it's great to have the permanent person in place, and I think we're all really happy to see that. However, if that person wants any vacation time or sick leave, anything like that, uh, they're going to need to have somebody as a backup.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground on this. There are a lot of moving parts to this discussion. I appreciate you giving me some time here, Councillor Brent Sampson. Did you have anything else you wanted to add about any of this just before we wrap up?
No, I hope we're looking at it as a past tense situation at this point, that things look better right now, but it's going to take a little bit of time for people to, I guess, believe that things have been straightened out. Because, we've seen this in the past few months a couple of times where it looked like a solution was right there or about to be there, and then things would fall through at the last minute, or some situation would change, and then service was disrupted again. So I think we're all hopeful that this new person will work out, and I hope they, enjoy the job. And I think people are appreciative that they have somebody here. But we really hope this works out, and hope Canada Post pays close attention to this, so it doesn't happen again.
Well, we hope that the mail will go through to Grand River, Saint Esprit, Lower Lordways, and the surrounding areas. But in the meantime, Councillor Brent Sampson, we appreciate you giving us some time here. Thank you for joining me today on Telile 24/7.
Well, thank you very much for covering this, Adam. I appreciate it.
That's no trouble at all. Brent Sampson is the councillor for Richmond's Municipal District 5. We've been speaking to him at his home via Zoom. Stay tuned for more of Telile 24/7 in just a moment. And now let's take you to St. Peter's, where residents and organizers are getting ready for the latest edition of Swim the Canal, the popular summertime event which takes place during the St. Peter's Community Festival of Nicholas Denny's Days. Originated in 2014, ran to 2019, and then took a 2-year pandemic-related breather before coming back in full force in 2022. What's in store for August 6, 2023, as Swim the Canal gets ready for another season? Let's speak to Gordon Kerr, who is the official coordinator for Swim the Canal and has been part of the event since its inception back in 2014. It's been said that the first edition of Swim the Canal was designed in 2014 on a bit of a whim by members of the community who recalled fond memories of swimming in the canal during their earlier years. The concept of a formal canal swim was designed to tie into a visit by the Lieutenant Governor of the day, who was presenting St. Peter's with one of the Lieutenant Governor's Community Spirit Awards. However, according to one of the current coordinators of the event, Gordon Kerr, Swim the Canal wasn't designed simply as a one-and-done type of deal.
I don't think it was an experiment. I think we thought all along we could do it multiple years, but the Governor General's Award was, pretty special for St. Peter's, and we were able to just tie in the presentation along with the swim, so it was just a natural fit.
Whether it was designed as a long-term or short-term event, Kerr and his fellow Swim the Canal organizers knew that if the event were to be a success and to remain safe, it would require cooperation between local organizers and Parks Canada officials overseeing the St. Peter's Canal National Historic Site.
I approached Parks Canada and say, what can we do? Can you shut the canal down for an afternoon and let us swim through? So we spoke with the Director General and did a formal application, and then did a site plan where everything would be and how it would work. And so we went through that formality. But the lockmaster at the time, Robbie Mann, he was really supportive. Of course, at the end of it, at the first day, after the first swim, he said, "Oh no, now everybody's going to be swimming in the canal again." Because, of course, they had signs up saying, "Don't swim in the canal." But now we have kids jumping off the side of the canal, swimming in the canal all the time. And Parks Canada is okay with that. And that's the kind of relationship that we've developed, that it's not a bad thing for people to go out and enjoy the canal.
In the first edition of Swim the Canal, the pathway for the swimmers stretched from the Atlantic Ocean side of the canal to the Bredor Lake side. That pattern was reversed a year later due to current issues in the swim from the ocean to the lake. Today, organizers consult with the current canal lockmaster Janine Mumbercat to make sure that the swimmers have a safe pathway leading up to the event and when it finally takes place on the first Sunday in August.
Yes, we check with the current lockmaster Janine every year, ask her about the tides, and how that's going to affect, to make sure that when we open the gates, there'll be a big rush, or at least not a backwards rush. The first year that we did it, we went in the opposite direction, and people struggled to once the gates opened, to swim against the current. So we learned our lesson the first year. A good friend of mine and his dog had a struggle, and they couldn't actually finish the swim. But it's okay. Everybody survived.
No, you weren't hearing things. Gordon Kerr did say a swimmer and his dog.
And his dog. Yeah, the both of them. Well, he did. Yeah, I'm not going to name names. It's a friendly swim. Families get together, and the kids and the parents swim together. We've had 4, maybe 5 generations of families swimming.
As with most community events during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Swim the Canal was put on hold during the years of 2020 and 2021. However, with restrictions for gathering and social distancing lifted by the province of Nova Scotia in March of 2022, organizers in St. Peter's started gearing up to revive Swim the Canal in August of last year, and they found plenty of willing participants, leading to nearly record-breaking figures on all levels.
The thing that got me the most last year was that on the day of the swim, we had probably 100 people sign up just on the day. To be honest, we were a little concerned about who would come and what would happen. And then on the day of the swim, all of a sudden it all came together, and people were just ready to enjoy it again. And the whole crowd got together. Everybody was comfortable. Even though everybody's swimming together in the loch, people aren't really that close together. It's a big space. It was a beautiful day, and everybody was just happy and having fun and relaxed.
And as usual, it wasn't just Richmond County residents taking part in the 2022 St. Peter's Canal swim.
There were people there from all over the world, and all over Canada, the United States, and Europe, and a lot of people from out west. People come from Saskatchewan a lot. There's no water, and they love to come here for the water. And there were people from Geneva, I guess the eastern seaboard of the States. And yeah, we actually had people from Israel there last year. And there's nothing like it in Cape Breton. There's nothing like it in Nova Scotia. There's nothing like it in the rest of the world. We have we have the canal here in St. Peter's, and everybody should come here and swim the canal with us because it's just a wonderful event, and not only people in the community, but people all over the world just gather together and enjoy the camaraderie of swimming together through a canal.
Based on last year's success, which saw 225 people pre-register for Swim the Canal, in addition to the roughly 100 in walk-up traffic, Kerr and his fellow organizers in St. Peter's are expecting another big swim when August the 6th rolls around.
Well, this year we've got about 160 registered so far. We did some pre-registration, trying to get people to register to order their T-shirts by the 1st of July so that we'd know how many to order and so on. And so we're trying that this year, see how that works out. We've got some Swim the Canal water bottles left over from last year that we're going to hand out for people to register after the 1st of July.
Proceeds from Swim the Canal 2022 went to Ukrainian refugee organizations in Nova Scotia. This time around, organizers are taking a different approach.
We're trying to be more consistent. So this year, we run this through the Village on the Canal Association, which is a volunteer organization in St. Peter's that tries to promote events in St. Peter's. So we're just saying now we donate the funds to the Village on the Canal Association, and they can go ahead and divvy out those funds how they see fit.
In the end, Gordon Kerr and his fellow Swim the Canal organizers know that an event like this doesn't happen by accident.
There's a lot of volunteers involved in Swim the Canal. There's a lot of background work that has to happen. And the volunteer fire department in St. Peter's has been tremendous in providing support to make this a safe event. And the Nova Scotia Lifeguard Association has always provided lifeguards for the swim. Quite often it's a challenge because they have the Nova Scotia Lifeguard competition and awards the same weekend, but we always seem to get lifeguards to come and want to participate in the swim. And the volunteers that handle registration and make sure everybody gets their T-shirts. And actually the East Coast Credit Union is a big supporter of the swim, and they come and provide water and for swimmers after they exit the water.
So, how can swimmers and would-be swimmers get in on the action this year?
You can pre-register for the swim at the St. Peter's website, visit stpeters.com. There will be a link to the Swim the Canal and a registration online. Or you can register by calling my wife, Anne Marie Kerr, at 535-3759. Or the Visitor Information Center with Anne Marie York.
And whether or not Swim the Canal started as an experiment, Gordon Kerr feels it's already taken its place alongside another popular late summer event that developed in St. Peter's in the 2010s.
I guess it's like pirate days. Huh? St. Peter's is on the map, and it's nice to see.
Some of our viewers may not know that the reason that I'm able to do 2 weekly news programs here on Telile Community Television is because of the Local Journalism Initiative, or LJI. It's administered for Telile and other stations across the country by Cactus, which stands for the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations. There are other Cactus news reporters in other parts of the Maritimes, including the woman that you're about to meet. Vicki Hogarth has been with CHCO-TV in St. Andrews, New Brunswick for many years and hosts many programs on the New Brunswick-based station. We've discovered lately that there have been a lot of common threads between issues arising in her part of the Maritimes and issues arising right here in the Strait area. So I thought it would be a good idea to bring in Vicki Hogarth to talk about these common threads. So here is our conversation right now. Vicki Hogarth joins us. Thank you, Vicki, for giving me some time today.
Well, thank you, Adam. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, so any excuse.
So I wanted to begin by talking to you about an issue that you and your crew at CHCO found themselves covering in early June, wildfires breaking out in New Brunswick, just as they were breaking out in Nova Scotia, Halifax Regional Municipality in the South Shore. What can you tell me about what that was like for you and for your crew covering all this and dealing with what was happening here? What can you tell us about that?
I remember even the moment that we started covering it, because it was a Sunday, and this is the Beau-Quebec and Shamcook wildfires in southwest New Brunswick. So we're based in St. Andrews. This is really about 5 minutes outside of St. Andrews, where the wildfires were. And we have a really great following here at CHCO, really interactive viewers. So I can't tell you the number of messages that I got right away saying, I see a weird smoke in the sky in the Shamcook direction. Do you have any idea what it is? So actually, at the time I was with my dad, and we just took a drive. And as we got closer to where we realized what a serious fire it actually was. So I called Patrick Watt, our station manager, and said, you need to come meet me out here and bring the camera. So we ended up not expecting to do this with a Sunday afternoon at all, but we just ended up at the side of the road in Beau-Quebec, at Kerr's Ridge to be specifically, filming for about 4 hours, just the fire as it grew. And you could see it already at that point. And the start of the fire here happened because of an ATV incident in the woods. I don't know the full details exactly of what happened, but it had to do with an ATV near a place called Stein Lake. So, but even by Sunday afternoon, there was fires in different parts that had jumped already, and we just started filming. And I was posting as Patrick was filming with our cameras. I had my phone out too, and I was posting exactly to Facebook in real time the fire as it was taking over, because the people were soon evacuated from the Beau-Quebec Shamcook area, so they really wanted to get a picture of where it was. And I'm not sure if you have experienced the same thing in Nova Scotia, but in New Brunswick, it is a slow news day for a lot of places. There aren't as many journalists working. And given where we are in this part of New Brunswick, it's very rural. We are often the only people here covering this area anyway. A lot of the reporters that would cover this area for other outlets aren't actually based here. They come in when there's a story. So the truth was, we were the only people on the ground that Sunday covering it. So it ended up being, I think it was CTV Atlantic. I don't know if they called us or we called them. We have these good relationships with other news outlets where we just say, listen, we're covering this. Do you want some video? So over at CTV in Halifax, they took our footage right away that Sunday night and aired it. And we also gave it to CBC. I think maybe not Global the first night, I can't remember. But again, by the next morning, I think Patrick and I were like even doing radio shows with CBC to keep people informed about what was happening. So, I mean, it's these very weird experiences sometimes when you're covering rural parts of the world that you are oftentimes the only journalist, not just from the place you work, but the only journalist in general on the ground when something major is happening. So that was our experience at the start of that forest fire. And then when the other media did come the next day, because it was quite a serious fire, what we found was that we were collaborative people, so it was easy to do the best we could to help coordinate interviews for other stations as well, and publications with people that we knew were affected by the fire. And also when we were able to get back into where the fire was to show people, to take other journalists in with us. We know the back roads pretty well. So it was an interesting time, a little scary when it's in the exact part of the world you live in. So yeah, definitely quite to say now when I look back on it, I think how blessed we were to have such a rainy period after that here in New Brunswick. But I mean, I'm sure that you feel quite differently in Nova Scotia, where you've seen flooding in the post-wildfire time. What's it been like for you?
I've been watching a lot of this from afar because with the wildfires, as with the flooding, a lot of this happened on mainland Nova Scotia. But even though it was happening in HRM and on the South Shore for the flooding, but also HRM and more of central and northern Nova Scotia, Hants County heading into Colchester County, we were still impacted by that. And I mean, that's the kind of thing where you have conversation with people like your local emergency management. And I know that in terms of the wildfire situation, a big concern for many of us around here was, how do you get out? What's the evacuation route? And our warden, Amanda Mumberket here in Richmond County, brought that up, looking at the situation in HRM, specifically in the Tantallon area just outside of Halifax, because many residents there were saying they really only had one road in and out of Tantallon once the fires broke out. And they wondered, what are they going to do now? And for many of us here in Richmond County in the Strait area, there is only one way in and out. And as we've grown fond of saying over the years, there's really only one Canso Causeway. There's only one way to get on and off the island from this particular part of the island. So it's a sort of situation where we watch all this from afar, but we know that it could impact us as well. And watching the work that you did, and I mean, Vicki, you talk about leading other journalists along the back roads. It helps to have a local journalist who knows what's going on in the community and knows the back roads and knows how to get there. What did you feel like personally when you were in the middle of all the wildfire coverage that was happening? I mean, I imagine this is the sort of thing that is almost like a coming of age for a journalist and for a TV station and for a news division. What was that like for you?
In some ways, I remember, so the Sunday that it broke out, we were working, we stayed up all night. And I remember going for a drive at 4 a.m. and thinking, we probably shouldn't be here. It was pitch black, save for the fires happening. Sometimes you'd be on the side of the road, you'd see nothing, and then drive a kilometer, and there would just be a fire right on the side of the road, and we would get out to film it. And I was thinking, at what point should we be turning back? But the next day you couldn't do that. There were police officers blocking the roads. But when it first starts, you realize, especially when you're in a rural part of the world, there's only so much you can do when a fire's jumped all over at that point. And at night, it wasn't like they could continue fighting the fire. So there it was, just burning. And that was a really weird feeling. I don't know what, I think sometimes when you are face to face with something you've never experienced before, sometimes you expect your emotions to go one way and they just don't. It was sort of this feeling of, I don't want to say awe because it sounds like it has a positive connotation, but that's what it was. It was just like bewilderment at wow, this is what's happening right now. But here we are, and at the same time, because we are the local news station, we were posting along the way. We do film for television, but at the same time, we know our Facebook following is really big, and people are on there looking for these very real-time updates of what's happening. So I was trying to do that, at 4 a.m. as well, because people who had been evacuated from their home, and where our station is based, where I am right now, is the W.C. O'Neill Arena, and that's also the evacuation center, was another part of this arena. So I was very much face-to-face with people who I know from the community, who were wanting to know, if their house was okay. Sometimes, just because you can get out, maybe your cat wasn't home, things like that make the situation so terrifying, because these are your neighbors. And, there was one family that ultimately lost their home, and another family that lost a camp to this fire. So to the severity that things had happened in Nova Scotia, we didn't feel the extent to which you lost multiple homes. But still, when it's the community that you live in, you feel it on a different level. You don't just come in to cover the story and leave. We're here in the aftermath too, as people recuperate from the fire as well, which, when you live in this part of the world, there's recuperation on many levels. I mean, I was very much phrasing it as, where was the fire? The fire was Bocabec and Shamcook. Yes, that is neighboring to St. Andrews. But I did find many news organizations, because St. Andrews is this well-known vacation destination. They were phrasing it as the St. Andrews fire, which actually had an impact on tourism for St. Andrews. And that's always a great lesson when you're a journalist, is to see how the aftermath of something, if even a little change like that for a station that's maybe not based here, to say, oh, it's the St. Andrews fire, for our viewers who might not know about Quebec-Chamcook, but they'll know St. Andrews. Well, that's actually had an impact on our local economy because of the way it was maybe innocently phrased, but there are some damaging effects to even changing a story ever so slightly for headlines.
We can connect with that, I'll say, because we had a situation here where the main tourism organization for Cape Breton Island, Destination Cape Breton Association, put out a release just 2 days ago saying that they've had to be on their toes because a lot of their visitors are calling and saying, well, I hear there's flooding in Nova Scotia. To which they've had to say, yes, there's flooding, but it's in central and southern Nova Scotia, not in Cape Breton Island. So come on in, we're open for business. Not doing that in a way that's not compassionate to the loss of homes and the damage to infrastructure, and sadly to the loss of life with the recent floods. But by the same token, saying to visitors, it's not Cape Breton where it happened, come on in. So that just goes to show you that sometimes even the misuse of one community name or one regional name in a headline or in any kind of discussion, even on social media, can make all the difference in the world. Well, I wanted to pick up on another topic that does have some common threads then, and that's on the imposition of carbon pricing and carbon taxes on July the 1st. Of course, that impacts the price of gas in both New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and it also impacts the cost of such things as diesel and home heating fuel. Both of the premiers of our provinces, Mr. Houston and Mr. Higgs, and the premier of PEI, Dennis King, were solidly opposed to this. And I know that this was something that the Atlantic premiers made one last pitch to the federal government just before the end of June to say, we want an emergency meeting to see if we can stop this. So we know that Premier Houston has been going great guns on this. The provincial government spent $50,000 on advertising just as June shifted into July and the new gas prices came in. What's been your sense of how Premier Higgs has handled this from the New Brunswick vantage point?
Well, I think anyone who thinks of New Brunswick, and even as far away as British Columbia, I don't think you can think about New Brunswick without thinking of Irving, right? So and then on top of that, you take the fact that New Brunswick is a rural province. We are driving no matter what. I walk to work today. I will tell you, I walk a lot because I do live within the town limits, but that doesn't mean I don't have to get in the car at least a couple times a day because there are things that are just too out of reach. So I think it's fair that they would debate that we have a different lifestyle in the Maritimes, and for New Brunswick, it isn't just the ties to Irving, but that is a big part about New Brunswick. And I know this is going to sound a bit like a tangent, but I think a lot of New Brunswickers felt this recently when Irving put out a statement that, and this is in the midst of all these conversations going on, Irving recently put out a statement saying that they were entertaining the idea of selling off parts of their company. And that's a terrifying thought in a lot of ways. You know, we oftentimes in New Brunswick, we do criticize the Irving family for various reasons, and a lot of that has to do with all the different levels of companies that they own, and the number of New Brunswickers that work for them, also the gas industry with paper. But, you know, we saw this happen earlier last year when the newspapers that the many newspapers that Irving owns, you know, when they sold off to Post Media, it became the situation of the devil you know. So when the Irving, it was easy to criticize the Irvings for let's say not covering glyphosate properly because they're in the forestry industry in their papers and maybe controlling the message. But then when you see these papers sold off to Post Media, and since then they've cut back to they're just 3 days a week now. There's printed paper. So it became a case of maybe the devil you know is the better one to be dealing with. And I think that, you know, in light of these talks about carbon tax, I think that there's that fear in New Brunswick too, not just on a government level, but among people who live here about, well, what will this mean for future ownership of Irving? And if it's not owned by family that lives and at least cares about this province, what will that mean for New Brunswick? So yeah, and then you look at what gas prices are right now. I just went down before this interview to see what's the price of gas right now. the $1.70 for a liter, which is crazy. And I don't think when I lived in a big city, I mean, there are times in my life I lived in Montreal and Toronto, and you never drove there. So you never had to think about it. But I'll give you an example of a person that volunteers at CHCO. He lives in St. Stephen. He's a waiter here in St. Andrews. So he travels here 5 days a week for work. And it's costing him right now, just to drive to work from a neighboring community, that it used to be that you could, these many people that live in these two communities, you might live in one, work in the other. It's just a normal thing in this part of the world to drive that long to get to work. And there's no public transport. There is none. So you do have to drive, and it's too far to walk or bike. He spends $150 a week in gas just to go to work. So, and he works as a waiter, so it's basically minimum wage plus tips. So it's getting to a point where this is unreasonable, and it's his job. What's the perspective on all this in Nova Scotia? Because I think here, as much as I do think that when the Premier says stuff like, it's not that anyone's anti-environment here, it's just the reality of implementing important changes into everyday Canadians' lives who live in this part of the world.
Well, I'll say this too, in terms of the gas prices in Cape Breton Island, in Port Hawkesbury and the surrounding communities of Port Hastings and then Ald's Cove, just off the Cancel Causeway, the price per liter of regular self-serve is $1.80.7. So the prices are higher in Nova Scotia than they are in New Brunswick. There's a slightly cheaper option in some parts of eastern Richmond County, but for the most part, it is $1.80.7 right now. But it's interesting to take a look at some of the ideas there. For example, for a long time, there was an issue in the community of Amherst that gas prices were lower in New Brunswick and people were making their way into Sackville to fuel up there. I do wonder, you mentioned St. Stephen, which is, of course, right on the border of Maine in Calais. Have you heard anything about whether people are heading to the U.S. for cheaper gas?
I can tell you they are, because I was just there.
Oh, okay.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I try to stay neutral on most things, but as a journalist, you know that you make a pretty modest living. So that real life moments hit you where, is it cheaper for me to cross the border? Do I want to support local? Sure. But if I'm going to the US, then I will fill up on gas there at this point in time, because filling up your car it's an expense beyond anything in my lifetime that I've experienced, where I see people having to make a choice between many things that were never really, they would never think twice about before. But yeah, even just going to make a simple trip to St. Stephen is expensive enough to just drive there. So if you are driving there from St. Andrews, 25 minutes, you may as well hop across the border. There's a gas station on the other side. And this comes from me, a person who really does love to support local, but it's at a point where for anyone on a modest income, it is now almost like an extravagance. But you're in a community that requires you to drive. And there's no rebate, you know, and I look at groceries, and inflation, I see it the same way, where a government can send you a rebate. But is that really helpful? It's a very Band-Aid solution to something that has a much bigger impact on your life.
And that's the conversation now here in our neck of the woods as well, too. If you're going to get a rebate because of carbon pricing and you're getting your grocery rebate, as many people did this month, is that actually going to cover what you've lost, or how difficult it is in terms of buying the necessities? And I mean, a lot of people around here making the decision during the winter in particular, do I pay for home heating oil or do I pay for groceries this month? So that's complicated by the arrival of carbon pricing, whatever anybody feels about it ideologically. And so that's an issue for us over here as well, that whole word affordability coming up again and again. I want to pick up on Premier Blaine Higgs, and it's interesting to look at his political career and some of the choices that he's made. You talk about carbon pricing. I know early on in the debate, he went to Saskatchewan and took part in a big rally that was being handled by the Premier of Saskatchewan, still the Premier now, Scott Moe, against carbon pricing. So he's made his position clear. But he's had to put out some fires of his own within his cabinet and within his caucus, including an MLA that I know you've interviewed for your programs as well, too. Lots of calls for Higgs to step down right now, and several riding associations of the PC party across New Brunswick also formally requesting that Higgs step down. Before we get into what led up to this, what's your sense, Vicki, on where all this stands right now? Whether Premier Blaine Higgs is even safe through the rest of the summer into the fall? What's your thought about where we are right now with that?
Well, as much as there are calls from some people for him to resign, I don't think you can ever underestimate the power of his supporters either, because there are people rallying to get more people to pay into membership of the PC party so that they can vote to keep him in power. So I wouldn't say that you could really cancel out his chances right now, but at the same time, I wouldn't say those fires are put out either. They're very much alive. There's very much a lot of issues going on within the party right now. But will he survive it? I wouldn't be surprised if he does.
He's managed to weather several political storms. What do you think it is about him that gets him through these scrapes and these scuffles, and why you think he might be able to hang on and get through this one?
Well, I think it's like anything. If people go out to vote, then they get to call the shots. I mean, if your supporters are passionate, then they're going to go out and vote for you to stay. And if the people that are maybe naysayers can't be bothered, then that's really the issue right there. It's not whether what majority of people agrees with him or not. It matters who goes out and votes for those kind of things. So if it's a matter of him staying in a leadership position, and right now he has a lot of groups that are rallying to get people to join the PC party so that they can vote to keep him in power. And if they're able to do that, then ultimately that's democracy.
And one of the things that interests us about what's happening with Premier Blaine Higgs is because a lot of this controversy has come about due to changes that New Brunswick's Education Department has wanted to make in something called Policy 713. Can you tell us a little bit about all that, and also about what you've seen in terms of reaction to all of this over the weeks in June and into July?
Right. So Policy 713 is sexual orientation and gender identity policy. And basically the changes that I think the minister, Bill Hogan, in his eyes, it's minor. But what it does to the safety of the LGBTQ plus community in their eyes is major. So basically the main change that has caused the conversation to be what it is at this point in time is that anyone who wants to change their pronouns or change their name in schools used to be able to do that without parents being involved, regardless of what age. Now, these changes say if you're under the age of 16, that means that your parents have to be involved in the conversation. And it does say, well, if they don't feel safe talking to their parents, then they have to work with a guidance counselor or a psychologist to make a plan to talk to their parents about changing their pronouns, changing their names. But if you talk to people from the LGBTQ plus community, they will say that oftentimes they're not home. I mean, I think many of us know that there are oftentimes situations where people don't feel safe at home. School is a safe place. And having these conversations, or even the idea of having to have these conversations, could lead to serious trauma, and in serious cases, maybe suicide. So that's the conversations that we're having right now in New Brunswick that really do have an international spotlight. I know it was up in Fredericton at the legislature for a vote to have the policy reviewed that was put forth by the Liberal Party, and as you saw, six PCs voted with the Liberals to review these policy changes. In that moment also, we saw Dorothy Shepherd, who's a minister, resign from Higgs' cabinet. I was there when she put the letter in his hand after the vote, and it was a really dramatic moment. And you could say that these changes are minor, but what you have to do is listen to the LGBTQ plus community to understand what these changes actually mean. So at this point in time, they have Kelly Lamrock, who is the youth advocate for the province, reviewing these changes. And I think by the end of summer, we should hear what he has to say, what his review has to say. But definitely, it's put this major spotlight on New Brunswick, and people are curious to see what happens, because, you know, on the other side of it, people will argue, well, shouldn't parents be involved in these conversations? And I think when we all imagine parents, we want to imagine people who are supportive and care about their children's well-being. But what the conversation is asking us to look at is the bigger picture of all homes and what that could mean for an individual who doesn't feel safe.
Vicki Hogarth, it has been a treat to talk to you again and to get some great insight on issues that we share between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Thank you so much for joining us here on Telile Community Television today.
Well, thanks for having me, Adam. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to staying in touch.
And there you have it. That wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. Thank you for tuning in, and a special thank you to my interview guests this week, Judy Morrison, Brent Sampson, Gordon Kerr, and Vicki Hogarth. Thank you to my Telile colleagues Nick Boudreau and Connor Sampson for their assistance in producing the studio interview with Judy Morrison at the top of our show. And a big thank you to Florence Mitchell of CHCO-TV in St. Andrews, New Brunswick for production assistance on my conversation with Vicki Hogarth. If you have any thoughts about what you've seen over the past hour here on Telile 24/7, or just some suggestions for future editions of the show, feel free to contact me directly or to contact Telile Community Television in Arichat. And be sure to follow Telile on social media. For now, I'm Adam Cook. Thank you once again for joining me for the latest edition of Telile 24/7. I look forward to seeing you again soon with a brand new show. Bye for now.